Praise the Lord. We want to welcome you out to our Sunday school that we began last week, and we're looking at the dynamic of follow-up and the very importance of this. And as I mentioned that, the word I had received at the Bible conference on Cape Cod that, get the church ready for what God's going to begin to do, I thought follow-up is very important because of the dynamic of personal involvement, especially with young believers. New believers come in, there are all sorts of issues we spoke of last week that they're facing, the pull of their old lifestyle, friends, sometimes family will oppose them, and how they need people who will be involved. This is part of what Jesus called discipleship, and bring them to a place where they're involved and have the best chance to make it for God, the best chance to live for God. And so we began to look at that last week and shared some stories. My wife as well and others shared stories of when they were new converts, and critical moments of someone reaching out, someone being involved with them and to help them to make decisions so they didn't fall back into their old lifestyles. And so began to look at that. And so this is what we began our Sunday school on. We're only probably going to do this for another couple of weeks. We'll move on from there. But let me give out some scriptures, and then we'll begin to dive into this week's issue of Sunday school. Who would get 2 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 8 for me? I'm sorry, not 1 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 8. Jeremy, 1 Thessalonians. I need 2 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 5. Laura? Going to need 2 Timothy 3 and verse 10. Mom? And one more will get us through this first section. I need Romans chapter 1, verses 8 through 12. Yanni. All right. So this will really help us establish. Let me ask you, well, let's read 1 Thessalonians 2, and then I'll ask the question. 1 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 8.
Instead, we were like young children among you, just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well.
So Paul says here to this church, he says, we delighted in you so much. What God was doing was fantastic, that we didn't just share the gospel, we actually shared ourselves, our own lives. And so where does follow-up begin? This is the question I want to ask. Where does follow-up begin? If you're going to be effective, this is true in so many areas of life, but where does follow-up begin? The altar? No. It's a good guess, though. That's what I was hoping for. Where does follow-up begin? Rich? Which is great, but no. No, and there's a reason. Those are very good answers. But I want to go beyond that. Nelson?
Pastor Greg talks about when people come into the doors of the church, that's where
you meet with them when they come? Yes, absolutely. But that's not where follow-up begins. John? Begins with us. Begins with us. Before you meet them, before you take them out, before they pray at the altar, it begins with us. And all of those we're going to see in later weeks are all very important. It really helps people to come back to a friendly church. I had a true story, a good friend of mine, Alan Taylor was pastoring in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And he was pastoring during what they call the Troubles, which was very segregated religious lines, the Protestants and the Catholics and all of this kind of thing. And so it was very tense. It had to do with independence for, I'll leave the politics aside, but it had to do with independence for the sect. So they had a young man who was involved in some of the war there, the Troubles, had got out of jail. They were beginning to release political prisoners on weekends and things like this. And he had gotten saved and came to church. And he comes to church. Well, another man comes into church, a visitor that no one's ever seen before. And they're all convinced this man is a hitman for the other side. And it's only a matter of time that sometime in the service he's going to pull out a gun and he's going to shoot this guy and run out the door. So nobody talks to him. Service goes on, nothing happens. The man leaves, and Pastor Taylor would always scratch his head going, I wonder what this man thought. He comes into the church and no one talks to him. No one sits near him because they're all afraid of him. And yet he was just a visitor that came in and was interested in but their minds were in a different place because of the tensions in the society. But, needless to say, the man probably never came back. Probably thought, this is a strange church. Nobody talks to me, right? So here's the reality. Follow-up begins with you, not with the convert. Okay, mark that down. We need first to understand that you transmit who you are. That's a reality of life. You transmit who you are. Not what you say, but who you are, what you become. And so it's easy. Human nature is always easy to look at other people and say, that's their fault, and we can easily do that. Pastor Robinson and I were kind of talking about that at breakfast, how easy it is in human nature for us to have a different standard for ourselves than other people. And yet, the Bible is clear that if we're going to minister on any level, you're going to transmit who you are. And that's incredibly important. 2 Corinthians 13:5.
Yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not realize that Christ Jesus is in you, unless, of course, you fail the test?
And so, Paul is writing this. This is not our ultimate rebuke is like you dirty, filthy people. He's saying, you know what? It's good to examine yourself because it eliminates the devil's chance to bring condemnation into our lives. But an honest examination. See if your faith is genuine. See if you're in the faith. See if what you say. I read a story about a man. He was a Christian singer. And in the 1980s, in the late 80s, early 90s, he was extremely popular. He was he wrote incredible songs, but he had hurt his back, got addicted to pain medication. And as a result, he said, I'm out talking about the grace of God, and I don't know the grace of God. And so through a number of different events, he ended up losing his marriage over the addiction. He lost his singing ability over and all this, and he ended up in rehab. Now he to see him now, he's a very handsome man, very probably good looking, which probably didn't hurt his musical career at all. But you could tell now he's the face of an addict with kind of his teeth, that kind of look. And but he got genuinely saved, and he does small little concerts now and tries to minister among people of need, of addicts. But he lost it, and he said, you know what? I spoke of it, but I didn't know it. And so sometimes it's easy to speak of Christianity, speak of what we believe, but our lifestyle doesn't back it up. And why is that important in follow-up? Because Christianity is spiritual transference of who you are, a lifestyle. I mentioned in a sermon recently, your compromise often can become your children's standards. Your low point becomes their high point. Your excuse becomes their reason. And so this is important. Before we can make a true Christian, we need to be a true Christian. That's, that's not like, wow, but, and so this is the reality is there's no substitution for a dynamic of a relationship with God. To know Jesus, to know God, methods are good, but methods at the expense of a relationship with God, they're not effective. Then we're just doing what the business world does, selling a product. And I want church to be, church is not a product to sell. It's a relationship to have. A relationship with Jesus to have. That if we're simply just saying, oh, our programs are better, this is kind of the trap of some of the megachurch mentality is we just have to have the right programs. And some of the megachurch pastors will even say now, we had programs to sacrifice the relationship. People don't read their Bible, they come for the programs. They come for the Tuesday night men's basketball league, they don't read their Bible. And so in life, impartation, your relationship, before it can be true in them, it must be true in you. Paul is using the analogy in 1 Thessalonians of parenting. And so parenting is imparting to your children what you do and who you are, not just what you say. I can't tell you as a kid how many smokers told me I shouldn't smoke. You know, kid, you shouldn't start these things. They're bad for you. Well, you know what? The words are empty with the cigarette in your hand. Right? And I can't tell you how many told me. Probably 3 or 4 or 5 smokers, like including my dad. Don't start. It's a bad habit. But the problem was, I'm watching what they did, so before too long, I was smoking cigarettes. And terrified the day my mother found them in my pocket because I left them in there. But, you know, the reality of that. And so Christianity has to be in your heart. It has to be something that is dynamic. There has to be a spiritual and an awareness of who God is. What God has said for follow-up to work. It starts with you. It starts with not just what you say. I told them. Yeah, great. But if it's not alive in you, then is it going to be effective? And that's a critical mark because there is no substitute for that. It becomes cold, it becomes religious. This is, Jesus spent lots of times rebuking the religious and saying, yeah, what they say is correct, but don't do what they do. Because what they're doing is not right, but what they're saying is right. And so, in this understanding of follow-up, beginning with you, it also needs people who will become open and involved. Many people, or let me just say this. It's easy to minister detached from people. It's to never become personally involved. You can minister in a way, and this would be like the 5:30 Wednesday afternoon call to them, are you coming to church tonight or not? It's a detached. It's a duty. It's not about people. You know, I'm convinced why preachers will simply retire from the ministry and write books. Because it allows them to minister, but you don't deal with the two issues that will drive you crazy, which are people and money. If you didn't have to deal with people and money, would you agree? Ministry would be a piece of cake, right? But the pressures of budgeting and all of this kind of thing, and you know, demands, and you know, it's like, you know, so just write books. It's easier, right? And I'm all for people who write books and stay in the ministry and deal with people and money and, you know, can relate. But, you know, some of them begin to lose that. But to be involved in people takes the willingness also to say, I want to be imparting. I want to help people. It's not just a position, a title, or something to do. It is because, you know what? I care for them. I want to see people in heaven. 2 Timothy 3:10.
Before they are appointed as deacons, let them be closely examined. If they pass the test, then let them serve as deacons.
Okay, 2 Timothy. That's 1 Timothy.
You know what I teach and how I live and what my purpose in life is. You know my faith, my patience, my love, and my endurance.
He says, you know me. This is who I am. You know my love, my teachings. You know what I live. You know my purpose. You know my heart. You know my faith. You know my patience. You know my endurance. You know my love. You know. It's not you know, I can recite the understanding of the Trinity and the pre-tribulation doctrine and, rapture doctrine. And I can go through all of that. I can lay this all out. Absolutely. That's great. And that's important. What about people? What about putting this in? This is the biggest barrier to deal with, because in life, it's easier not to deal with people. The Italian proverb, little children, little problems. Big children, big problems. No children, no problems. So, why have problems? Why invite problems? Why let people see? You can't minister effectively, if you're not open, if you need to believe in Jesus like I do. But you hate your spouse. Yeah, well, they're jerks, and you're how's that going to be effective? How's that going to work? It doesn't work, right? You need to be faithful to church, but I'm going, I can't make it on because I got to change the air in my spare tire. Some of you will figure that out later, right? Any excuse, and we're not there. But you need to be. You need to do. And so this becomes a barrier, because some would just rather not deal with other people. They're messy, they're problems, they're prickly sometimes. They're going to say stupid things. Of course, you never say stupid things. I'm just saying. Yeah, I never. But they out there say stupid things, right? And it's easy to begin to point the finger and begin to say that, I'd rather not deal with this. So some people then go through the mechanical ways of doing this and, disconnected from other people. And, this is why people say, did you go to Bible school? I say, no, I didn't. Well, how did you learn? Well, doctrine can be learned. Book knowledge of the Bible can be learned on your own. But what you'll never learn in a classroom is how to deal with people. Because they can't, one, lay out all the scenarios. I made the statement once to Pastor Mitchell Sr. that dealing with people is an art, not a science. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean by that? And it was good, challenge what I'm saying. I said, well, what I mean by that is that it's not a one-size-fits-all. You can't deal with a 13-year-old boy like you deal with a 70-year-old lady. It's not a one-size-fits-all. You can't deal with, a teenager. You can't deal with people coming from the inner city the way that you deal with people coming from the country. They're coming in with different mentalities. And I'm not saying we make an excuse for sin or we do that, but there is a reality that, Paul says, I've become all things to all men, that I by all means might save some. Right? So you deal with people on different levels. You deal with people in different ways because of the culture they're coming out of, the background they're coming out of. And that takes an art, not a science. Well, I told them to do this and they did not do that. You do this. Right? You can't do that. It's not the way you deal with people. We're dealing with people that are broken in many different ways, different issues of sin, of life, of background, of upbringing, of culture. So let's just think, and I want to ask this, what are some of the areas that either we have to overcome or we have to learn to deal with in others to be effective? But let's start with what we need to overcome first. Yanni?
I personally think that one of the major things is like the rejection of like certain people like it can get to you if you let it. I feel like that's one thing that we have to personally myself.
No. It's hard to invest in someone and then they don't make it. It is hard. You've tried, you've reached out, you've had them over, you've taught them, and then I'd rather go smoke dope and sleep around. And you just go, it's frustrating, heartbreaking. But if you keep at it, God's going to give you fruit, and He will help you with that. That's really good. What's another area we have to overcome? Sharon? Yeah, and fear is on my list here, like, what if they don't, we fear, what if they don't like? Think about a visitor. Think about a visitor, especially one who comes into a church knowing no one. They've overcome more fear than you are dealing with just to say hello to them, right? Because they just don't know anybody. And they don't know what they're expecting, and they don't know how this is all going to work out, and and so in life, fear is definite. But, the world is full of a lot of lonely people. They have 3,000 friends on Facebook and no one to talk to. And it's really, and so sometimes if you put yourself out there, now, you're not going to connect with everybody. There's just some people's personalities that aren't going to be good for you, and it's going to be that way, and that's life. But, and there are books that can help with that. Verbal Judo, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Super Communicators, just a couple that come to mind that are good books to read on, how to talk to a tree and have a good conversation. That you can get past some of that. And so that is true. Anyone else? Rowan? Excellent. That was my number one, personal prejudices. Absolutely. Right. And so when we hear prejudiced, instantly the issue that many think of is race, and that can be a factor. But that can be age. That can be education. Man, they're smarter than I am. They've got 4 PhDs, and I dropped out of high school, and I don't know if I can talk to them. Right? We can do, they're old, they're too old, they're too young. They're this, they're that. And we can judge, and we do. We judge people. That's a trait of human nature. We're sizing people up when we meet them. We're sizing people up when we see them. Are they having a good day, a bad day, bad hair day? We try to read. Some people we totally read wrong. There was a man who, he wasn't in our fellowship, but he used to play the piano. He used to do old gospel, old like Scott Joplin style piano playing. And if you don't know who he is, he was The Entertainer. If you know that song, he wrote that. And so he's this incredible piano player. And so he's in a church, and it was full of black people. And he's like, usually, he says, they're all jumping and dancing, And this one, they're just all sitting there. And he finishes, and they all... And he's like... So he's pouring it on, and they're just like... Comes to find out that they're not... They were all from Bermuda. They were all raised English. Tally-ho, chip-chip, all that jazz. Very stiff upper lip kind of thing. And he's like, I read the crowd so wrong. So wrong. And that happened. We can read people wrong. That, he's expecting what he normally sees in the South and this, and now he's in a place and it's not happening. And so if we're not careful, we can let our prejudices, oh, they're that way, they're this way. This is what drives me crazy with our 24-hour news cycle and politics, that they try to lump all the voters of one particular ethnic, age, education group are all supposed to vote the same way. Like, really? All 35-year-old male whites are going to vote this way, and all 18-year-old young Hispanics are going to vote this. It's like, really? We can't have our own opinion? And so we have our prejudices, and this is emphasized in our society. That we have, that this group should be this way and that group should be this way, and we see this, and so sometimes we think, oh, they're going to be that way, and they're not. Totally different. And so this can be true in lifestyles, this can be true in all sorts of things. So, important to understand. Anyone else? And I'll throw one more out there. But anyone else? Reasons why, reasons that we need to overcome for people? Amy. Much more than your sisters, yes. Yes, to overcome our personal, I think this goes back to what Sharon was saying, our personal fears that we'll do. I think the other way, is that we need to view people as God views them. And Jesus didn't see the disciples as the way they were. He saw them as who they could be. And in working with people, you need to see them as who they can be and what God can do in their lives. And so when it comes to follow-up, we just have to ask this question: is it important? Is it important? See, last week we talked about, that to retain fruit, make disciples, it's building relationships, imparting into people's lives spiritual truths. Is that important? Because if it is, then the long haul becomes the goal, not the short-term gain. Working with people with problems, having personal plans interrupted, enduring disappointment of people who backslide and deal with that. These are all issues that in the long term we've got to deal with. That, some people, they're making great decisions, and then all of a sudden they do an about-face and they're in disaster again, and you're like, what happened? Romans 1, 8 through 12.
First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you always in my prayers, making request if by some means now at last I may find a way in the will of God to come to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gifts, so that you may be established, that is, that I may be encouraged together with you by the mature faith both of you and me.
And so here he says, you know what, my encouragement, people making it. And so how you determine value on people is going to determine whether you receive joy from it or if it's a drag. If people are a liability, then it's going to drive you nuts. If people are an asset to your life, then it's going to be a great blessing. And so follow-up has to begin with us. It has to begin with our ability to make ourselves the people who we need to be and be willing to examine ourselves and make ourselves overcome these prejudices and fears and such. And it doesn't mean that you won't have them, but it's sometimes it's shocking. I go back to a woman that we struck up a conversation with in an airport lounge. She was wealthy. She had it together. She's telling us about her success, and she worked for Ford, and she was up on the board. I don't think she was ever going to hurt for money again. But in the conversation, we began to talk about how we were ministers and how she began to open up. She lived in Florida somewhere, and how broken she was. And she was a person that I would have at first glance thought, she's not going to be open. And by the end of it, she goes, I just bought a Bible. I'm like, you need to read it. She's like, oh yeah, I know. It's on my nightstand. I'm not reading it. And, began to just talk to her about that. But she was one that I would have looked at first and gone, She had all of those good things going in her life, but the reality was she was still a lost sinner. And I walked away. My wife was with me on that at time, and we were just like, yeah, we have to be more sensitive to that. So, any questions to this point, comments? Steph? Yeah, it does. Totally. Totally. That's excellent. Oh, Darren. Yes. He does. He loves it. That's excellent. Loves them very, very much. And cares about them. And they may be broken and messed up and full of sin and full of strange beliefs. When I got saved, my whole religious philosophy was based on a Black Sabbath song. So, it's like, true. That was it. That's who I was. That's what and, mixed in with Catholicism and, God's going to judge you good and bad versus bad. And so as long as I can do some good things, I might make it. I might be okay. And, it's just not the way it really works, but it's good. So a major issue then in follow-up is making yourself open to God. Saying, God, I want to see an individual make it. This is not just about them liking me. This is literally about heaven and hell. This is about where they will spend eternity, either separated from God or with Him. It's not just about whether they, are liking me personally. Because if you're going to try to get everybody to like you, you're going to have to play politics. If you're going to play politics, you're going to compromise. I think Bill Clinton was the master at that. When he said the words, when they asked him about something, he said, well, some of my friends are for it, some of my friends are against it. I'm standing with my friends. Such a brilliant political statement. It's brilliant. It's wicked, but it's brilliant. It's wicked because he doesn't make a stand either way. It's like, fish or cut bait, man. Come on, tell us what you believe. But that was the master of politics. Right? I just want my friends to like me. So when I'm with the guys for it, I'll be for it. When I'm with the guys against it, I'll be against it. He was the master. I did smoke, but I didn't inhale. Do we really believe that? Of course not. But it's a master of trying to walk both sides of the street. But Christianity is about a conviction, a relationship with God, and eternal consequences. And so, equally important when following up is a new convert and the willingness to be for them. So let's get a few more scriptures. I need Isaiah 6 and verse 8. Who would get that? Yanni? And then I need Exodus 3:11. Sawyer? I need Jeremiah 1, 6 and 7. Darlene? Perfect. And I need, we'll make it. 1 Timothy 4, 11 and 12. Jeremy, thank you. Philippians 3:17. Larissa. 1 Corinthians 11:1. It's a very short verse. Mom. Luke 6:39 and 40. Davina. And 1 Corinthians 4, 15 through 17. Steph, thank you. All right. So that was pulling teeth. I wonder why. Usually it's not that bad. Anyway, Isaiah 6 and verse 8.
Also, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me.
And so here Isaiah sees the throne room of God, and it's quite a vision, and of course he realizes some issues, but he hears the voice of God. Who will I send? Who will go for us? So one of the key issues of any ministry is availability. To first make yourself available to God. It's true of any kind of ministry before the Lord. One of the key factors of being used by God is simply making yourself available. Inactivity or just waiting on God can sound spiritual, but eventually can cause us to miss God. That in this text of Isaiah, it puts the responsibility not on God, but on us. Who will I send? Can God interrupt our lifestyle? This becomes true of sending out couples. Sometimes they don't want to be interrupted. The job, the house, the school, the kids, it's an interruption. Moving to a different city, learning different roads, sometimes different, and then a possibility of going overseas. And, one of the things we love with the Robinsons is we did it this morning at breakfast with missionary stories. And learning cultures and languages and this and that, and, life interrupted. And so ministry is responding to needs. That's often what ministry is. There's a need. Can I respond to it? Can I be effective? Can I see my life count in this need? Now, not every need can we respond to. There's a million. We went to the market yesterday to outreach, and when I was there, just before we went in, there's some people and they got televisions around their neck. I'm like, okay, is this an outreach idea? So I go over. I got my sunglasses on, so I can't really see what's on the television. And then finally he goes, "What do you think of this? The chickens?" I'm like, "Chickens? Yeah, how they." They're in these cages and they're producing eggs, and and those that hatch, if they're males, they only live for a second, you grind it out, and this is horrible. And I looked at him and I just said, okay, this is horrible, and I agree with you. But what's your stand on abortion? And he got pale. I'm pro-choice. I said, isn't that morally and logically wrong? That you're for rescuing chickens and you're not? Well, they're fetuses. I said, you were a fetus. I was a fetus. Did you ever notice they don't have fetus showers? They have baby showers? Because we know what it is. And at that point, I went, you're being morally and logically twisted. This doesn't work. You can't be for saving chickens and against saving babies. That doesn't work. And I walked away. I wasn't going to get into a long argument. But we could protest that. There's churches, they get into Operation Rescue, and they're going to stand in front. We could protest the drugs that they're now doing, the gambling, the pornography. We could get involved in all of these vice things that are out there. And I've seen it. I've seen them protest and to stand in front and do all that. But they can become a distraction, right? They're not the causes that we're to get involved in. We just need to preach the gospel and see people. So not every need needs to be responded to, but there are needs that are legitimate that we need to respond to. And God's not going to allow things like our excuses. Well, I don't have the talent or the ability Or Moses said, I stutter. I can't talk right. And I'm not mocking stuttering. But that was Moses. That's what he said. And God said, that's not, no, don't worry about it. I can do it. There's a man I saw preaching one time. He was born with, I think it's called, I might have the symptoms wrong, but I think it was cerebral palsy. He got trapped in his mother and was without oxygen for 8 minutes or so. Do you know this guy? And he speaks with a horrible lisp. But when he preaches, man, you tune in and you know what he's saying. It's amazing. Because, it's not the clearest speech. But there's an anointing on it that allows people. Lack of a talent or ability is not a problem with God. He's not worried about that. Exodus 3 and verse 11.
But Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?"
Right? And then he goes through all the reasons why he can't. Jeremiah 1, 6 and 7.
O sovereign Lord, I said, I can't speak for you. I'm too young. The Lord replied, don't say I'm too young, for you must go wherever I send you, and you must say whatever I tell you.
Don't say you're too young. When my wife and I went out to pastor our first church, we were 21 years old. We actually didn't open the church until we were both 22. I opened it on my birthday. She's older than I am, but don't tell anybody I said that. Anyway, it's like 43 days older or something like that. So anyway, we're there, and she's talking to a woman and her daughter who came, and the woman says, I guess we can start once the pastor arrives. And she says, no, he's the pastor. And she's like, oh. Because, in our mind, we think back now, we understand. She's probably looking at us going, you must be the pastor's kids. Because we look like kids. We were kids. We took over the East Hampton Church. I went next door to our building. There was an insurance agent over there. And he walked into our Saturday morning prayer meeting one time. And he goes, where's the pastor? I come over. I'm like, shoot, he's going to argue. Maybe we're parking wrong or something. You want a photocopier? I want to give you a photocopier. So it's great. We didn't have a photocopier back then. They cost a lot of money. And so he gave us a photocopier. It was very nice. So I went over to get insurance in his office to try to transfer it up and where we were living now. And I went in, and the secretary goes, oh, are you kids up for school? I said, no, I pastor the church. Oh. Right? We're just kids. Right? It's not an excuse. I'm too young, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that. God says it's not a problem with me. What he wants is consistency of life. See, and time is what reveals a consistent walk with God. Time is the great revealer. And so this is why I tell people, don't rush into ministry, don't rush into marriage. I tell couples that start dating is discovery. You're going to discover who they are. What is dating? Dating is hiding our flaws. This is not totally in my notes, but dating is hiding our flaws, right? So that we can put our best foot forward and impress this person that we like. But when you marry them, you marry their flaws. So you have to take time and discover who they are. And in that, you're going to discover who you are. Because when you're alone, selfishness doesn't matter. Because the only one you're being selfish is me. My money, my time, But now you've got someone else. And now it's not my money, it's our money. It's not my time, it's our time. It's not my decisions, it's our decision. And that begins to challenge us. Time is the revealer. And so when we're dealing with people, we're dealing with the issue of having time and working this through and dealing with a new convert is having our lives be consistent so that we can reproduce in their life what Jesus has done in ours. 1 Timothy 4:11 and 12.
Command and teach these things. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity.
So love, faith, purity, setting the example. Philippians 3:17.
Dear brothers and sisters, pattern your lives after mine and learn from those who follow our example.
And 1 Corinthians 11:1.
And you should imitate me, just as I imitate Christ.
So here over and over in the scriptures is the thought of imitating a life, learning. Why do we speak English? Because our parents did. We imitated them. We got in society. We imitated them. Had you been born in Paris, you would speak Francais. Had you been born in Moscow, по-русски. Right? You would have imitated those around you. And that is a natural way of growth. Why do we use our forks like a shovel and the British use it upside down? Because of imitation. Why do, and on we could go. And so this means that personal growth in our lives is critical for follow-up. Luke 6:39 and 40.
Then Jesus gave the following instruction. Can one blind person lead another? Won't they both fall into a ditch? Students are not greater than their teacher, but the student who is fully trained will become like their teacher.
And so students are not greater. We're not saying that we're better than a new convert. We just have a little bit more understanding that they can have and be equal to and then teach others. 1 Corinthians 4, I am rushing it a little bit, but 1 Corinthians 4:15 through 17.
For even if you had 10,000 others to teach you about Christ, you have only one spiritual father. For I became your father in Christ Jesus when I preached the good news to you. So I urge you to imitate me.
Verse 17.
That's why I was reading from the, hold on.
You can read it off the board.
Yeah, it's not there.
Yeah, it is. That's 17.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just labeled wrong.
oh, okay. That's why I've sent Timothy, my beloved and faithful child in the Lord. He will remind you of how I follow Christ Jesus, just as I teach in all the churches wherever I go.
So Paul says, not only do I teach it that way, Timothy teaches it that way. Right? And so eventually, people have to mature on their own to be able to teach others. And we're not going to get to it, but Hebrews 5, at the time you ought to be able to teach others, you are need that I teach you again, desiring having to deal with milk and not with meat, da-da-da. And so the understanding of maturing people begins with us maturing and being that person. Now, are there any comments or questions? We're going to have to wrap this up and going to start revival. Just a minute. Excellent. So we got about 2 more weeks of this, and so look forward to that. We're going to start revival with evangelist John Robinson in just a few minutes. Lord bless you.